Welcome to another episode of the Free Spirits Podcast, where we explore the functional and THC beverage industries. I'm your host, Lars Miller, here with co-host David Gonzalez. Today, we are joined by Angus Rittenburg, CEO of Wherehouse Beverage Company and CTO of Wynk. Angus brings a fascinating background as a former Tesla battery design engineer who's now revolutionizing the cannabis beverage production and distribution industry. Welcome, Angus. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you very much for having me on. Excited to talk all things Wynk.
Absolutely. So, like I said in the intro there, you used to design batteries at Tesla, and now you are making cannabis beverages. What sparked that transition and the initial idea for Wynk?
Yeah, it was not a very direct path, as you can imagine, but I I left Tesla. I was very involved in mechanical and thermal design of the Model 3 battery pack, and I wanted to go do a startup. It's kind of interesting in 2021 in the cannabis space. You know, you could only sell through the dispensary channel because all the THC products at the time were derived from marijuana, which is still federally illegal, but legal in individual states. We couldn't ship across state lines. So there was a unique problem for cannabis beverages where you had to produce the beverage in each state that you wanted to sell. And it was under very strict regulations and seed to sale controls. So it didn't really make sense for anybody to be building beverage facilities in every individual state. And as a result, there were very few beverage options. So not from a cannabis standpoint, but from a technology standpoint, it was interesting to me to sort of think about how do you create a technology solution that makes it economically feasible to produce beverages in each state that you sell. And the initial concept was, rather than go to each state and get cannabis processing licenses, why don't we partner with license holders that already have facilities and bring to them a beverage production solution that is mobile in nature, and we could use available areas of their existing space, produce THC infused beverages, and go state to state and produce inventory and leave. So what we had was a 53-foot tractor trailer. It had generator, chiller, batch tanks, carbonators, canning lines. We would set up sort of licensing partnerships with cannabis license holders. We'd arrive at their facility with our sort of traveling circus of tractor trailers and a team of 6 people. And we'd go into their space for a day or two, set up our canning operation, produce a bunch of inventory, and then pack it all up and leave. So for our partners, you know, it gave them a way to produce a new product that they couldn't otherwise do. And for us, it gave us a way to sort of create a new category and brand. But myself and my 2 co-founders were not cannabis consumers and certainly didn't come into the industry because of an interest specifically in cannabis. It was really this technology solution. And, you know, in the early days of formulating, we tried high dose drinks, medium dose drinks, and low dose drinks. And as non-cannabis consumers, the low dose drinks were fascinating for us when we were sort of experimenting because they were a really good alternative to alcohol. So it appealed to us. And that's why, you know, from the first days in 2021, we went out with a 2.5 milligram drink, which is just enough in a can to make you start to feel an effect, but not so much that you're out of control or your experience is completely changed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really how we started. We called the brand Wynk, seltzer with a wink of THC, just playing on this idea that it had a low dose. And we went to work. And in the first year, we expanded into 10 markets. And in the second year, we had 2 tractor trailers and 2 teams every week going state to state producing.
Angus, I want to jump into what's the official term? The Wynk wagon? Is that what you guys coined?
Yeah.
So obviously it's an impressive piece of mobile production. It's an entire facility, more or less on wheels. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, did you have an experience at Tesla for an engineering background, maybe like a first principles type of methodology where you looked at this market problem and said, okay, the CapEx of having all this infrastructure all across the country is way too much. But how did you guys iterate on this process and ultimately, A, come up with a solution, and then B, I imagine you probably had an MVP, if you will. You figured out, okay, this might work. Can we scale this thing? And ultimately, did you find any sort of thresholds where you were like, okay, we've made X amount of cans in X amount of states. Like, what is our our capacity here? And then how do you navigate some of those challenges?
Yeah, I would start by saying it's a little bit less glamorous than that. I grew up on a farm building all kinds of contraptions when I was young. So I always had an interest in building things. And then, through engineering school and a whole lot of internships with a wide range of companies, became a little bit more sophisticated in the way that, things are designed and built. But I had a unique sort of range of experiences, mechanical, electrical, and programming and physically building things that set us up well to move really quickly. We saw the opportunity for sort of a unique category of beverages in the dispensary channel and an opportunity to provide a new type of cannabis product that would be compelling for alcohol consumers. The Wynk wagon, the original sort of tractor trailer system, was designed and built very quickly. The idea made sense to us. We ran the rough numbers, and as many know, successful beverage brands are very, very valuable. We designed and built this first system in 2 months. So had the idea, sort of sketched out what it could look like on a napkin, and then myself and a very small team worked day and night and built this, and that was the start of the company.
Wow.
But this wasn't like an extensive engineering analysis design thing. It was like, let's build something practical that works and go. And that's what we did. But there was always a vision for a much more scalable system. The tractor trailer was just kind of proof of concept. Let's get this brand, squared away, the formulation, get the product in market, start to get feedback, and let's do that quickly to give us a starting point while we work on something that is much more complicated. So after getting the trailers commissioned and operating and letting the rest of the team focus on state expansion, I was still working on a more scalable way of doing this. And what that was much more sort of deep, challenging engineering. The system that we graduated to when we ran out of capacity on the trailers, which was always the plan, the trailers weren't going to do, national scale production. The version 2 was taking traditional beverage cans from any of the common manufacturers, Crown, Ball, etc., and designed and built a machine that punched a hole in the bottom of an empty can. So you take cans from the manufacturer, put a hole in the bottom, insert a small one-way valve that the consumer would never even know was there. It's kind of hidden in the bottom of the can. And at that point, you could take these cans and produce them at scale in one facility anywhere in the country, undosed. So we'd fill them with, the Wynk formulation, but no THC.
Right.
And then I designed a dosing system that is about the size of a desk. It doesn't require any special utilities from a facility. You just plug it into the wall. And we would place these dosing systems with our partners that would fit in any of their facilities and ship the finished product from our centralized production facility to each of the states. Within the state, cases would be loaded 24 cans at a time into this machine, and the machine would just simply dose the cans with THC. So you took the need for building, large scale canning facilities that are cannabis licensed, and replaced it with a very small machine that worked a lot like a vape cartridge filler, and was could work in any facility. And that's what we moved to. So once we kind of ran out the capacity of the trailers, we switched over to this system. We could produce large batches, very good economics, and then ship them pallets at a time to the individual states where they would just get dosed with THC. So that's what it moved to. And that's what, if there wasn't this sort of hemp-derived alternative route to market that came to be, we could have scaled through the dispensary channel, even with the interstate commerce issues, using this more advanced technology.
Yeah, wow.
So that's what got us through year 2 to 3. And then in 2023, we started to make a sort of bigger strategic shift to focusing on low-dose hemp-derived THC beverages that could be shipped across state lines, dosed, sold through Bev distribution, which is what we're largely focused on today.
So my first experience with Wynk was from the dispensary channel. I purchased some up in Michigan, the original white cans and everything. It kind of was the beginning of my journey into not drinking anymore, because I took it with me on a bachelor party. So it was great to kind of not be as wasted as some of my peers on this bachelor trip. But you guys recently made the decision to focus entirely on hemp-derived THC. What drove that pivot? You kind of were alluding to it there. What ultimately led to that decision?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just for a minute, THC can be as a molecule. It can be derived from marijuana, which is federally illegal, but legalized on a state by state basis. But it can also be derived from hemp, which is federally legal. And the effect in the beverage, so long as you isolate the THC molecule from either source, is the same. So we had an opportunity with sort of regulation shifting 2022 to 2023 to make the exact same Wynk with THC derived from hemp, dose it in our facility at scale, and then ship across the country. Importantly, these hemp-derived beverages don't need to be sold through dispensaries and can be sold, anywhere that beer, wine, and liquor are sold, which for us with a low-dose beverage brand, our consumers are largely shopping in liquor stores, not dispensaries. So from a sort of customer market, route to market fit, it made a lot more sense. We played in both channels for 2023 and most of 2024. We were selling Wynk, which is our low dose brand, through Bev distribution primarily, and then also selling a high dose beverage through dispensaries. We went up to 100 milligrams with a brand called Countdown. So for the majority of 2024, we were producing high dose drinks in dispensaries and producing low dose drinks derived from hemp and selling them through liquor stores. But what we found over the course of the year is for every unit of time or effort we were spending on the higher dose dispensary channel, we'd get return in the Bev channel. So we started to wind down our dispensary business the end of last year, and going forward, we're fully focused on the low dose brand Wynk and producing it at scale in our facility and shipping through alcohol wholesalers across the country.
Yeah, the major drawback to selling in the dispensary channel from a low dose standpoint is like the products simply don't move, typically speaking, and it takes up a lot of real estate from a retailer side of things. So, and just like you said, you guys were struggling to move that product. Have you seen a significant upturn in terms of revenue as you've been scaling, going through the hemp-derived side of things?
Yeah, it's a much more efficient route to market. It's the traditional beverage playbook, and the distribution and the retail, they're all set up for doing exactly what we're doing, which is selling an adult beverage. Mm-hmm. There's so many more efficiencies getting the product produced and ultimately getting it to the consumer that really drives that sort of premise that every unit of effort, time or money put into the Bev channel goes so much further than the dispensary channel. So yeah, it's created much more rapid growth. We were pretty flat in 2024 on dispensary sales, and our hemp-derived sales were about 9x 23 to 24. So massive growth on the hemp-derived side.
So Angus, in addition to the switch of focus for the distribution, the retail points, the other big shift is it's obviously a different consumer, right? The person who's buying from dispensary isn't the same person as a liquor store. And so one of the things that I've noticed as well about the brand over the past, let's say 2 years, is the brand shift tone. A lot of the branding around it and the go-to-market strategy seems to now be different, or meaning evolve to speak more to these traditional alcohol infrastructure, so to speak, and those customers. So from a marketing perspective, how has your approach actually changed behind the scenes? There's a lot of news articles about PR pushes you're doing, marketing campaigns that are in the billboards or displays, things like this. So how did that shift from saying we're going to sell products in a dispensary to now we're selling products online, we're selling them through BevAlc distribution channels? How did that shift your entire marketing strategy and the brand behind Wynk as well?
In 2021, the dispensary channel that we were selling into was primarily medical. So we were selling through dispensaries that had patients, not traditional customers. And so the world then was far more pharmaceutical and medical, and the brand was a lot more plain and really targeting that more pharmaceutical application, so to speak. And then from a marketing standpoint, we were hugely limited in what we could do. Getting THC out in the world advertised was very challenging. So it's a very different marketing tactic, brand tactic. And I think our initial idea of what the target consumer was far more patient focused than customer focused. But fortunately, in 2022, a lot of the states and a lot of our distribution was more recreational. So these weren't patients with medical cards; these were just adults going into dispensaries. We saw that happening and did started work on a pretty major rebrand to make Wynk a much more sort of mainstream, playful brand with a heavy emphasis on sort of social wellness, being out with your friends, being active, being productive, not dealing with hangovers, empty calories, etc. So that shift was happening initially because of the change from medical dispensaries to recreational, and the timing worked out really well because when we completed the rebrand, changed our brand book, changed our whole sort of marketing approach, BevOut channel opened up to us, and that mainstream brand that we had created with a much more mainstream story and purpose was ready. And so when we launched into the BevOut channel, talking about a hemp-derived product, much more mainstream advertising platforms became available. And that story we had put together worked really well for sort of running the traditional adult beverage marketing playbook.
Right.
That was the progression. But Lars, the plain white can that you were mentioning finding in Michigan, that was that sort of original bland design. Our timing could not have been better for rethinking what Wynk is to target a more mainstream consumer.
So with those, you mentioned basically the channels that you have at your disposal and the overall messaging, positioning of the brand and product more mainstream, right? You get to kind of get out of this dispensary marketing mix that has a ton of red tape and move into some place that has a little bit more freedoms. Making that adjustment, what channels have been the most successful for Wynk? Is it a social media play? Is it organic? Is it paid? Is it doing these billboards, these displays? Is it in-store activation? Where are you guys finding the sweet spot for those marketing dollars?
I think the big thing this category still needs is, it's really about getting the product in places that people trust. There's still a lot of stigma. A lot of people don't quite know if it's legal or illegal, good for you, bad for you. But what we're finding is the more we can place these products in venues or at events or in stores that people really trust, the better it does and the more open consumers are to trying it. So, our biggest success is being in very legitimate chains that, consumers are used to going to every week to get their alcohol products. And, in chains like Binny's in Illinois, the product moves like crazy. They place the product well. Their consumers are very loyal. They trust Binny's. Binny's trusts our distributor. And, in lining all of these things up, you really end up with a really good situation where consumers are very willing to try. And then where you're able to line things up like Binny's, adding in sampling, giving people an opportunity to try really provides a big multiplier. From a sort of marketing event standpoint, we did a sponsorship with Riot Fest last year, which was really successful. And it's just another example of getting into a very legitimate sort of event, having the product available for people to buy. It's a place where they're having a good time. It's a venue that they trust and have been going to for years. That stuff we find to be hugely impactful. And then there's smaller, underappreciated sort of hyper-local events, just being at very local sort of festivals or farmers markets, being in people's sort of local towns, active in the places that they're used to going. All of that I value really highly. And I think the consumer does as well.
Yeah, I think the subtle distinction there is when you move outside of this hyper-regulated recreational market, you now have the freedom to actually meet the customer where they're at, quite literally. So if they're already shopping in these big stores or they're going to these event centers, going to these venues, whatever the case may be, you're getting the opportunity to actually get somebody to try your product and try it, enjoy it, get hooked on it, continue to purchase it over and over again, and make it accessible, as opposed to saying you can only get it here in this one type of store, and you have to go through all these hoops just to go get it. It's a fascinating juxtaposition of two different marketplaces. But I wanted to switch gears a bit as well and ask you about your facility, BestBev. So BestBev produces for a handful of other brands, from my understanding. How did this co-packing part of your, like, how did you guys add this element into your business? How do you balance this line of, manufacturing for maybe not competitors, but people who are frenemies, whatever you want to call it? How did you guys decide to say, you know what, we're going to open up and kind of lease our extra capacity? It kind of reminds me of like an AWS model. You have all this capacity. If you're not going to use all of it, why not lease some out? So how did you guys have that epiphany to say, okay, we're going to now open this up and bring in some outside brands?
Yeah, the our approach was sort of slightly different. From the beginning, this company or these companies was production and technology first. BestBev was started in 2021 as well. What we were always trying to set up was having a unique and really strong production backbone to our brand. So in the early days, it was having this mobile tractor trailer system. But when we started to shift to the dosing technology or version 2, we solved the tech problem, got the valves in the cans and accurate dosing, but you also need the ability to produce cans at scale to support it. And when you look at the economics, it never made sense for us to try and push these unique cans through co-packers, just too expensive. And it also didn't make sense to go small scale on canning. It's also very expensive. And so what we sort of came to very early on was, let's invest heavily in a co-packaging facility. Let's build a big facility to support Wynk, because we anticipate, national scale and really a high volume. But to just build that, make the investment in that facility and run at 5% capacity for Wynk didn't make sense. So what we did is built an entirely different business that was co-packing, and a small percentage of that capacity would be Wynk in the early days, and will be, a large percentage of the capacity will be Wynk in the future. Not sure when yet, but that's the goal. BestBev BestBev was built for mainstream beverage, alcoholic, non-alcoholic. It was not built for co-packing THC brands. About 85% of the volume is alcoholic, non-alcoholic brands you see everywhere. The facility's built to do about 18 million cases a year. Wow. So it's a very high throughput facility, yeah. And it allows the benefit to us is we can produce Wynk very economically.
Right.
And then use the rest of the capacity to, make the business cash flow by producing others. 85% being alcoholic, non-alcoholic, 15% being hemp. The hemp component's growing, and there's a clear need as all these other sort of brands are finding success for higher output co-packers. And it seems that most of the large co-packers in the US aren't touching THC yet. So there's not a lot of good options. And the qualities tends to be tricky on small canning lines. So we've seen some brands juggling 5 or 6 small co-packers. It's a logistical nightmare for them. From a quality standpoint, you're managing quality for a bunch of small shops. And I think for our category and for people to really trust it, the quality of the products on the shelves needs to be good. So we had a unique opportunity to be helpful to others there and open up some of the capacity for hemp. Hemp's also right now higher margin from a co-packing standpoint, so it's a good business opportunity. We would happy to produce our competitors. There's plenty of space in the industry, and I think the thing we value more than some sort of production advantage is just shelves full of good quality products. Mm-hmm. The challenge is BestBev set up for very sort of high volume and large runs. Brands sort of need to graduate to BestBev, so there's an 8,000 case minimum per SKU. Generally, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to fire up the lines for anything smaller than that. So it's a great product for brands that are at that stage and growing beyond 8,000 case per SKU runs. But I think hopefully the other brands you talk to will find that we're providing a good service for them.
So let's talk dosing strategy. You mentioned earlier that you and your other co-founders weren't really users, and that's why you guys initially focused on that 2.5 milligram. You guys now have a 5 milligram line as well. So, rumor on the streets has it that in 2025, Wynk might be rolling out a 10 milligram version. Is this true?
Yes, it's hard to keep those genies in the bottle. Yeah, we are launching a 10 milligram drink now. It's offered in 3 flavors, and a lot of the feedback from consumers is positive on the low dose seltzer front, but there's definitely a huge audience of consumers that are looking for products that are more flavor forward, so less of a LaCroix like seltzer and more of a full flavored product, as well as higher dose. So what we're hearing from consumers, retailers, and distributors is that there's huge demand for 10 milligram. I think in a lot of our markets, they're seeing distributors and retailers are seeing 50% plus of the sales go to 10 milligram. So we wanted to fill that gap for customers and obviously take advantage of the demand in the market. The one thing that we have been able to do, which is really exciting for us, is sort of stick to the brand promise of 0 sugar, 0 calorie. So it's still although it's a lot more flavorful, it still is 0 calorie and 0 sugar, which it's always been really unique for Wynk and the category, because 0 calorie is just something that alcohol can't hit. The technology doesn't exist. So when you look sort of across category competition, it's a pretty white space there. And it's also tricky to make it 0 calorie and make it taste good and not have the cannabis taste. But we did team did a very good job with our 10 milligram SKUs. There's 3 flavors. Each are a lemonade. There's a traditional lemonade. It's carbonated, but less carbonated than our seltzers. A strawberry lemonade and a raspberry lemonade. But all the flavors are phenomenal, and we're super excited to launch these.
So Angus, how do you guys incorporate this feedback loop that you get from maybe distributors, maybe if it's D2C customers, people who comment online, intuitively, right? If the product starts off with this 2.5 milligram, how did you guys get to a point where you said, okay, we have to have a 10 milligram option? There's maybe too much market share that we're missing out on by not having this option. So how do you guys set up these feedback loops to get input for a product roadmap, so to speak? What do you guys look for? Is it just anecdotal conversations? Is there hard data that gets presented to you? I guess what goes into that process of saying, okay, we're going to commit to doing these 10s? We also just saw, Can recently announced a 10 after all this time. We hear people say all the time, there's still that consumer behavior at retail where they might shop dollar per dosage and might prefer a 10. That might not be the case long term, but that is how some markets are playing out today. So how did you guys basically assess that feedback and incorporate it into making a new product line?
Yeah. There's really four main things that come to mind for me. The first is, one thing that we notice in any of the markets as their dosage caps are either defined or changed, you do see the majority of the sales occurring at the cap. So if there's a 3 milligram cap, the majority of sales are at 3. 5 milligram, majority are at 5. 10 milligram, majority are at 10. The demand seems to be as high as the market will allow. And so that was sort of like a macro trend that's clear across all our markets. We talk to our distributors to learn these things. Second thing we do, our sales teams that are in the markets are continuously doing market surveys, just tracking what else is out there, what is the price point, what's the dose. So we monitor that closely to inform strategy, just keep a pulse on what others are doing. Third, consumer feedback. We have a pretty good line to consumers through our email list, through DTC, and a lot of customers, I'm thankful for it, a lot of customers reach out with ideas and feedback, whether it's positive or negative, or just recommendations for other things they'd like to see. And then the last one, which is most important, is taking those other 3, bringing them to our distributors and working with them to say, this is what we're seeing, this is what we're hearing, what can we do, for you that'll really move the needle. And that's kind of how we finalize a product strategy and roadmap, right? What's the right flavor? What are you seeing trends on? Right dose, right price point, right pack size. And then most importantly, timing. When is the right time for us to introduce this with you across all our markets? So that's That's sort of generally how we see it. I think the tricky thing I've seen is it would be great to have more sort of market research or market surveys or data to look at. But I think the reality is a lot of the consumers that we really want don't know yet. A lot of the consumers we want haven't tried these products, and they couldn't tell us what they want.
Yep.
But seeing where things are moving using those four main points, I think is a good way for us to sort of shape the category and incrementally get consumers what they want before they quite know what that is.
Sure. So you basically have 4 data streams that you guys can look through, aggregate, and say, okay, we have a pulse on what's happening in any given market. And you can use that feedback loop, approach a distributor and say, here's the direction we're thinking of. Here's our hypothesis. Do we have your support on this? Do you have your own feedback or anything else you want to incorporate? I guess one of the things that comes to mind is by having a pulse on a market, you're seeing a trend of today, right? We're seeing, you mentioned this, it's a snapshot of the moment. It's not necessarily where a market is headed long term. So looking at this broader industry, where do you see hemp THC beverages headed in the next 3 to 5 years? Is it going to draw in more of these people who you mentioned you would like to be in market, but maybe aren't yet? And if so, how do we get there?
I have a suspicion that, coming out of the CBD boom where consumers were thinking these CBD cannabis products were going to have a psychoactive effect and we're disappointed that they didn't. This new hemp-derived THC category, I think there's a lot of concern from consumers these products aren't going to do anything. And so they're going, I think right now consumers that are new to this category want to grab a product that has an unquestionable effect. And so they're, a lot of the new consumers are gravitating to higher doses. But what I've found with people that have been consuming these THC beverages for a while is they are going back to the lower dose, more sessionable products. And I do wonder if I don't wonder. I think that's what's going to happen. I don't know how much time it'll take, but I'm still a strong believer in that original 2.5 milligram can that just barely gives you an effect. I think that's a really good long-term SKU. It's our lowest performer right now. We're going to keep it, and we'll keep selling it and pushing it because I just think, especially on premise, it's a really good product where people are going to have 3 or 4 over the course of an evening. And for most consumers that haven't built a tolerance, 10 milligrams, it's quite a lot. Lars, you mentioned it.
Yeah.
So that's my suspicion. We'll continue to, I think the important thing is getting products out there that satisfy the new customer. So if they want something right now that gives them an unquestionable effect, let's give it to them in a way that's responsible, right? We're not going to do a 50 milligram drink because it's just too likely to give somebody a horrible experience. But I think 10 milligrams sort of satisfies that desire for an unquestionable effect. And then, we have the 5 and the 2.5 for them to fall back on for a more sessionable sort of everyday product.
Yeah. The lower dose, I've been seeing some more like 3 milligram products on the market, which I think is like kind of that sweet spot, especially like in a 12-ounce format.
Yep.
For me personally, the 7.5, 8 ounce cans like tend to be not enough liquid for me, and then I'm sitting here and I'm drinking like 4 or 5 cans in a setting. 3 milligrams is like right there. But yeah, I think because I started off only drinking like 1 a night, and I would do some 10 milligrams at that point, but I would just get too high. So having those lower dose options and being able to have a couple, obviously my tolerance has risen a little bit since then as well. But let's look ahead here. You guys have Wherehouse Beverage Co. You guys have BestBev and Wynk in there as well. What does the ideal exit scenario look like, or the ideal outcome look like for you and the other founders at Wherehouse?
Yeah, I think from a industry standpoint, what we'd really love to see is the price for these products to go down and just hit direct parity with the alcohol equivalents, like give consumers a really fair alternative. From a sort of point of purchase standpoint, would love to see this just side by side with White Claw, High Noon, at the same price on the same shelf. I think that's eventually where we're going to get to. And I think that's what's needed for the market to really thrive. For our part, I'd love for Wynk to be, the sort of premier 0 calorie, 0 sugar low dose THC beverage of choice. I think if we hit it right, we'll use up all of our co-packing capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And in an ideal world, we get to a point where Wynk and BestBev are really the same. BestBev is supplying all of the production capacity for Wynk. That's where we'd like to get to. From an exit standpoint, I don't think we're spending too much time thinking about that quite yet. It's so early.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of the markets, we've only penetrated a pretty small fraction of the accounts available. And, there's a sense that of the accounts that we haven't yet penetrated, it's really less about marketing dollars to get them, or QDs, incentives, et cetera. It's really a lot of accounts are just waiting on sort of macro clarity on the rules. There's still concerns about banking, still concerns about their insurance, especially on premise. And we couldn't spend enough money to convince them. They just need to get comfortable. And that's going to come with, federal regulation that gives everybody clarity, banking and insurance becoming less of a concern. Like those sorts of things that we just couldn't spend enough money to make happen, but will come with time, are going to unlock immense distribution expansion for us. So it's a long way of saying, I think there's sort of a time equation here where it will take a while for us to reach our full potential, and it's not going to be a function of how much money we spend. It's just sort of building this category, making sure we're doing our part with BestBev to get good products on the shelves, keep consumers happy, keep regulators trusting everything in the space. And that's just going to unlock, huge opportunities for expansion for us and everyone. But my hope would be, if there is ever an exit event, we've gotten to the point where Wynk's big enough that it's utilizing the full capacity of this facility that we've invested in.
Well, Angus, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us and Wynk's journey as well as Wherehouse's. Where can our listeners, find Wynk and learn more about what you're building?
Yeah, so there's a good store locator on the Wynk website, drinkwynk.com. That'll show you where we are in retail. You can also order online and ship directly to your house. And then, if you subscribe to our email list, we're continuously giving updates on, what states we're opening up, new chains that we're available in. And then we're always running promotions on e-commerce just to make it easy for new customers to try Wynk with, at a very fair price.
Well, thank you very much. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Also, please don't forget to check out our YouTube channel for more additional content. And until next time, guys, cheers.